Hi, Bob Barker and I are back with the next part of our patio furniture set build, and that's going to be this coffee table. So let's get started. All right, so this is going to be the second build in our patio furniture set. The first one was the patio chairs, so if you haven't seen that one, I would definitely recommend to check out that video. We'll put a link up in there for you. So the general style of this is going to be matching that as well. So for here, we're just getting our initial wood cut down so we can get started on it. So we're going to be using the same type of legs and the same wood, so everything kind of looks good together. So first thing I'm doing here is getting everything chopped down with the 4x4s, and I'm marking each as I go. And just like before, I really wanted the legs to be more out of 4x3, but I couldn't get the lumber that I needed for that one, so I'm cutting the 4x4s down to 4x3s using my table saw here. And of course, I'm trying to keep all these labeled and separate so I know which side of the legs that each one of these pieces is going to be going on. So once we get those cut out, the next part is to put the bevel on there. So I just put up my table saw blade and put an angle on there, and I just run it through there to rip down the edge of it, and that'll put the nice bevel shape on there. So we just kind of repeat that process for all 6 pieces of these legs. And then next we're going to put the miter cut on each of the edges so we can put them together. And I must say, after I did the initial set with the chairs, doing these ones actually turned out a lot smoother, just had a better feel for exactly how I needed the shape and cuts to go. But some of these, it had a little bit left, so I just used the pull saw just to trim off the little edge pieces, and that still made everything nice and smooth. And just like before, we're also going to use the beadlock jig here just to help support these joints. So we drill 2 holes with it, move it from one position to the other, and drill the 3rd hole, and that's going to give you that continuous segment for the beadlock tenon to go in, and that'll help line them up and keep them nice and strong on the joint. And I have found using this jig that you do often have to use a little bit of the cleanup with the chisel, but in the end it works out pretty nice. So now that we got all our pieces cut out and ready, we're just going to go ahead and glue them up, and we're once again using the same culls that we rigged up from before on the last build, and just makes it so much easier to put these together. Now, of course, I don't have enough clamps yet to do like the entire legs at once, so it took me a little bit of time because I had to do one joint at a time, let it dry, and then just repeat the process for both of the legs. But in the end, just with a little bit more time, they all came out pretty nice. So when I was getting ready to do the rest of it, I realized that this board in particular had a bit of a bow to it. So I'm using the straight edge of my track saw guide there just to help straighten out the bow, so it's a good piece and it fits well with the others. And to do this, you just want to make sure that you first run it through with the bow going towards the blade. That way it doesn't rock against that straight edge, and then you turn it around the other way and you'll end up with a straight piece on both sides. And after that, we get the beadlocks put in for the support pieces that are going to be holding the legs together. And then after I did these initially, I just took a look at them and I realized they're a little bit chunkier than I wanted them for the look of the table. So then I just took them over to my table saw and ripped down the edges of them just to kind of thin them out a little bit better and give them more of the profile that I was looking for. So once I was happy with that, it's time to get the beadlocks holes set up here for the legs itself. So I'm just very careful as I'm measuring, going up to that line and getting it right precisely where I want it to be. And of course, taking into account the inset that I'm looking for these as well. And as long as you're careful with that, this comes together pretty nicely. For this one, I just got the longer tenon stock. That way I can cut it down to the size I wanted, because initially I had gotten ones that are a little bit too big, so I was just finding I had a lot of waste with it. So this stock actually came out pretty nice. And then I also did some pocket holes for some of the pieces that we're going to be using in the install as well. So now that everything is ready, it's time to get it nice and glued up. And of course, my clamps aren't quite long enough for the length of this table, so I'm just kind of hooking 2 of them together and using some extra wood on the side just to help kind of support those. And it ended up coming out pretty good. Of course, it'd be way easier if I had, bigger clamps, but we don't all have those yet. One day I probably will. I just don't have them now, so I had to make do. But one issue I did run into clamping it up this way is I had to be very careful with where I was placing these clamps, because if I moved it too much towards the middle or not quite right on those little lateral pieces of wood, it was kind of starting to skew the wood a little bit and throwing it off of square. So I had to be really careful with that, and I did have a square that I checked throughout the process to make sure. So once I had that done and ready, next is putting these outside pieces on, and I have these ones that are a little bit chunkier than the rest of the slats here because I wanted to have that good thicker look on the profile, but it wasn't really necessary to do the whole thing with it. So this is the pieces that I put the pocket holes on. So I just basically clamped it into place and then used the pocket holes to secure them. And, you know, I started doing it this way, and then I realized at some point that, hey, I can probably just like, you know, put it up on its side and be much easier to get to. So eventually I realized that, and it made it nice and easy to do it. And then after that was done, I kind of moved it to the side, and I pre-drilled and countersunked some screws from that support piece directly into the top. So it's kind of having it secured on multiple directions. So once that one is in, I start doing the other one, and how quickly I forget because I start putting it in the hard way again. I don't know why I didn't just put it on its side to do this and make it easy on myself. But hey, you know, where's the fun if you don't make yourself struggle just a little bit, right? And it's probably because the supervisor wasn't with me at this moment to point out my mistake. So after I finally get these pocket holes in and get it in, and I'm also gonna just flip it back up on its side eventually so I can screw the supports into that top piece. And I initially just started with 2, and then I put it up on my bench just to make it easier on myself, and then I put a few more screws in there just to keep it nice and secure. With that done, the next step is going to be getting some supports in. That way I can get the slats in place. And I just found a scrap piece of wood here, and I ripped it down to the right size and width. And then I got my setup ready. So I put these up on blocks, and I put the slats into place with just a straight piece of wood underneath it, so it's nice and flush with the top. And then I can just basically squish those supports right onto those and then screw them in place right where they're at. And that'll give me the spacing that I need to get everything nice and level with each other. So we just put a couple of screws in there just to kind of get those temporary in place on each side. And then we'll come back and put another screw or two to make sure it's nice and secure. And don't ask me why I had to wait to do that. So next I wanted to mark the middles here before we start getting the slats, and I was really careful to measure out the spacing that I needed, and I found it was going to be a little bit weird, so I just shaved off just the edge of some of these slats to make sure that all of the spacing came out really nicely, and it made it so much easier on myself. Now, when you do shave these down, you do get rid of that natural little round over that comes on most of the lumber. So I just used my my sander just to kind of break that down a little bit. And I also did the very edges too, where the slats join to the legs. Just it gives it like a nicer, smoother look. So here I just get some spacers, I put it into place and clamp it up just to make sure it doesn't move when I screw it in, and then I just basically repeat that process. I'm putting in a couple of screws on each side to make sure it never moves. I did end up running into a little bit of issues with this one because I had this wood sitting in my garage for a little while, and it was straight when I first got it, but it kind of started to bow a little bit over time. So I have to do some extra persuading at times to keep everything nice and even with each other and try to keep these gaps as even as possible. What I did find is with this middle piece, when I initially put it in, it didn't quite get as even as I wanted it. It was close enough where I can end up just kind of helping move it later on, and it does come out well. But you can also see with a little bit of bow, the top surface didn't look so level. So this is one solution that helps with that, is I just cut out another piece and I use it as a support here in the middle. That's also just going to get a little extra strength, but then I can also screw in each one of these slats to this, and it helps level them all out so everything stays nice and flush with each other. And you can see here the spacing in that middle slat wasn't quite right, so I did end up fixing that later once I eventually noticed it. So for now, just pretend that everything is even. So once I got all that together, then it's just lots of sanding to get everything ready for finish. And I did pre-sand a lot of this stuff before I put them together just to kind of make it easier. And we're going to be doing the same stain that we did on the chairs. And I actually ended up staining this one before I did the chairs, and I did the bottom piece just to see if I liked the coloring, and I did like it. So we went with it, and there it goes. And you can see there how everything looks so much better than it did with the spacing from before. And just like the chairs, we're putting some levelers on the bottom here. So I just used a Forstner bit just to kind of inset it a little bit. And then the drill, we tap in that T-nut. And for this one, then that's good to go. So once all that's done, I just do the last part of the finish, which is some spar urethane. We just did a few coats of that, and it came out nice and smooth. And of course, you do want to make sure as you're getting all the surfaces, you want to get the bottom of the legs too, because that could be easily exposed to water at some point.
All right, and that's the build. I think it's come out great. It's nice and sturdy, and it's gonna go great with the full set. And I actually did make this one to go specifically with the sofa that I'll be making. I had to put that on hold for a minute just because we don't really have room in my shop for it, and I need to wait till my backyard is ready so I can move the chairs and that out there, and then I can get that one set up. So we do have detailed plans available, how to make this for yourself if you're interested, as well as the chairs. So check that out in the link below. Otherwise, if you like what we're doing, give us a like or subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one.